Hey everyone, I'm Mike Henry, and here's my Procreate demo where I draw Janine Melnitz from The Real Ghostbusters. Those of you who followed my work for a while know that I've worked on this headshot lineup of The Real Ghostbusters, which is the cartoon version of the Ghostbusters from the 80s, although in my style. And I thought, let's keep going and add Janine to the lineup. Now, Janine has had a bunch of looks throughout the cartoon, although most of them have kind of been the same with just some color changes. Every now and then she jumps into a Ghostbusters uniform and she participates. Later on, she gets like a pink one or whatever, which is ridiculous, but I like pink, so I'm also kind of a fan of it at the same time. But the one I decided to go with was the yellow shirt, blue beads, green glasses. I just felt that that was kind of like the most consistent and iconic version of her from the cartoon. So let's go ahead and dive in. You'll notice right away Peter jumps in. So why is Peter in there? Let's go ahead and stop it right here for a minute. Now I'll talk more in detail about why I actually do this, but if you are looking to take a canvas that you already have and kind of like build off of it for whatever reason, I have a tip for you about how to not drag all of that video data with it, which is what makes the file size so big. So let's take a look. In order to take a canvas that you've already been working on and start something new without bringing along with it all of that video data, because sometimes that's the thing that's making these files so big in Procreate, I'm going to use this B-Sky piece, which you saw me do a walkthrough of a while back, to just kind of show how it works. So if I tap on B-Sky 3 here, you'll see that when I go into the time-lapse replay, okay, so now you can see how slow the little blue line in the top left is moving. In fact, it's a square, now it's a rectangle, eventually it'll become a line. When I drag through it, you can see that this is massive. This is 22, I mean, when it's all wrapped up, it'll probably be like 24 minutes, and that's a lot of data to carry with you in a file, especially when you're starting something new based off of something that's already existing. You don't want all that stuff. So how do you get rid of it? So you can see here I've already duplicated B-Sky 3 so that we have a new version of that file. Obviously, don't forget that step or you're going to lose everything. When you're actually in the file here, you go to your little wrench, and where it says time-lapse recording and it's checked on, like that is what is default. Almost everybody's always recording their stuff when they work in Procreate. Sometimes people don't even necessarily realize it, but if you turn that off, it'll actually ask if you want to purge the video. So if you say don't purge, this is the equivalent of pausing your video recording. I suppose that if you were working on something and you wanted to not capture some aspect of it, maybe you're bringing in some reference that you're not allowed to show on the internet, like something that is protected by NDA or something like that, or if there's a part of your process that, I don't know, for some reason you don't want to show, then you just say don't purge. And then watch, if I say don't purge, now it's off, and anything that I do in this canvas isn't going to be recorded until I turn that back on. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back on though and show you that if you turn it off and you say purge, that actually erases all of the data, all of the video data of your canvas, and I mean erases. So only do this if you know that you don't want to go back. If I go back here now to time-lapse replay, you can see that it's grayed out and I can't even see my replay. So then turn your time-lapse recording back on. Time-lapse replay reappears, but it's nothing, right? So now we have to say, okay, I'm going to create all of this stuff, and we should have like that replay, which is obviously very insignificant right now, but that's how you turn it back on. So that's what we do here at the beginning of the Janine piece. So that's how you get the canvas set up. Let's start talking about why. I'll go ahead and unpause this. So the main reason why in this case I wanted to build directly off of the Pete piece is because it had actually been a while since I did a Ghostbusters piece in this particular lineup, and I wanted to make sure that my proportions were accurate to the other characters. There's, you know, you can actually see right there, I just shrunk the sketch a little bit. Part of that was to get the head size around the same size as Pete's, and the other was to get some of the hair, her iconic hair, more in the frame. So that's a good reason to sort of bring something that you already have been working on in and just kind of like build off of that as you're looking for consistency. In fact, depending on how many layers you use, you could even be using all of the structural layers that you have that are about the consistent look that you have going on. Like for instance, the color of your shadows, the color of your highlights, maybe having it live there, you can reference the brush you use more easily. And you're going to see me do exactly those things regarding the color because it can be done, and I do it sometimes, but jumping in and out of files and grabbing like the color that you used here and the color that you used here so that you're making sure everything is consistent can become really tedious. Yes, you could create a palette, but sometimes you might forget which color is which. So sometimes I like to have that really direct relationship between, oh, I used this color for these types of shadows or these types of highlights, and I'm going to continue to do so. So when you see me flicking Pete on in the background, I'm not actually flicking on like the JPEG or the PNG of him. That's actually, he's got all his layers. And I know because these Ghostbusters files are really simplistic in their file structure that I can keep his files alive, I should say his layers and folders alive while I'm working on Janine's layers and folders. There is a time, I can't remember where it lands, where Pete becomes too much to keep in the background while I've got Janine that I'm working on, but by then I've already got my colors, so it's not a problem. So let's talk about Janine's, my interpretation of Janine. I went for, like I did with all of these, a pretty literal take in terms of I'm not changing up colors, I'm not actually redesigning the character. This would be the equivalent of like the draw this in your styles that you see online all the time, where it's an artist applying their personal artistic style to something without changing up its design. When you're going in to reinterpret something that already exists, there are so many different levers that you can pull on in order to figure out what you want to do new with it. So you could, in theory, redesign Janine in the exact same style as the original cartoon, but change her design. In fact, the show itself did that later on. Or you could do something like what I'm doing here, where it's a style change, it's not a design change. Although you could argue potentially that by changing some of the proportions, it's changing some of the design, but I don't really think so in this case. I think of the design much more literally as what are the colors being used, what is the design of the hair, what is the design of the glasses, etc., etc. Now, everything that I use in this video from a brush standpoint is in my brush pack. If you're new to the channel, it's not something you have to buy. It's just a quick little thing I made a while back. Everybody was asking me what brushes I was using, and I was using a lot of standard brushes, so I decided to create slightly tweaked versions of standard brushes, built completely from the ground up, but mimicking some of the behavior that you already get from standard brushes. I thought it would just be easier, instead of saying, oh, I made this brush custom in this one, but then I used this Procreate standard in this, to instead just say, hey, I've remade all the ones that I've used, go to this link and download it. So the link is down in the description. Once you've got those brushes, I'm going to just start talking now about which ones I'm using. The Fat Pencil, or the new Fat Pencil, or the Fat Pencil 2020, or whatever I call it in there. Fat Pencil is in the name. I don't even think about this anymore when I'm picking my brushes. That is what I use for anything in here that you see that's a line outside of the white, like outline hot highlight thing. Wow, I completely broke my brain on that one. The like highlights and outline around Janine. So the sketch is done with the Fat Pencil, but I've just sized it up to make it a little fatter and a little messier. And then it's drawn with this red to try and mimic the look of like a carmine red pencil. And then I've lowered the opacity a little bit again to get some of that sketchiness. And then I shrink the brush, essentially. I reduce the size to get a sharper, cleaner line, and that's what's getting this kind of like ballpoint pen look. All of the pieces from the Ghostbusters series are similar in style to what I used to do when I would just kind of sketch on paper in my free time. I would grab a craft paper sketchbook, and then I would use like a carmine red or a rose pencil, like a Colorase, and I would use a ballpoint pen, just like a Bic. That's like my favorite drawing utensil is a ballpoint pen. And then I would use like Elmer's white paint pens to put in like highlights and stuff. I almost never did marker work, which is kind of what it looks like in this piece when you get to the color. It's not really truly intended to be marker. It's really intended to just be, yeah, I just want this colored, and I don't really have an analog equivalent for it. But you could replicate that, or at least something close to it, by using markers. I mostly, if I ever did marker work, it was just like gray tones. So you can see here as I'm flipping things on and off, and I'm changing the opacity of the different layers and the blend modes of the different layers. I'm just color picking from Pete the things that make sense to color pick from Pete. So I color picked the carmine red pencil, I color picked the ballpoint pen. You actually can't really tell unless you zoom in, but the ballpoint pen is a really dark blue to try and mimic the fact that those ballpoint pens don't get like true black. And then I think I picked his skin tone because I was thinking that their skin tones would be similar. And then as I'm moving through the rest of it, like there's nothing else on her that's similar to Pete as far as her flats go. So I just went and picked all of those as I went. The entire time, of course, minding my reference. Something that's a little different with the Ghostbusters pieces is that in order to absorb some of that paper texture through the colors, all of the colors in this are set to some sort of a blend mode. They're almost all either multiply or overlay or something like that. And that's because I want them to look like whatever you're applying to get that color has some sort of transparency to it. The thing that brings complication to is if you follow my other stuff, when I'm setting flats for things, I'm usually overlapping those flats and I'm using one flat to occlude another. And in this case, I'm not doing that. So when I have to be just a little bit more clean. Now, luckily, these pieces are based on characters that are blocked for animation, so they're fairly simple, so it doesn't become like this really complex mess, and I'm only doing headshots on top of that, but it is just something. So if you go back, you might notice that with the hair I went like a little bit outside of where the hair should be, but then at least I can use the selection of the skin to then just clear away the hair. It's not that big a deal. I have to make sure none of them overlap. In general, I'm pretty good about remembering my process from piece to piece, or maybe my unique decisions when I'm doing a particular lineup, or at the very least I can go back through and dissect it. The one thing that's weird about the Ghostbusters pieces is I have these two layers of shadow here. One is a cool shadow and one is a warm shadow, and to this day I cannot remember exactly what my logic was with using certain ones. I go back to that Egon piece, which was the first in the series, all the time, and I'm like, why'd I do that? And why'd I do that? And there's something to it that works. So as I've moved through all of the other pieces, I've just tried to see if I can, like, I don't know, bring something to it that I'm like, I think maybe this is logical. I think this is kind of what I was going for. So when I go back through and watch these videos, I just kind of am reliving all the time, like, oh yeah, I guess that's right. I guess I did that right. Something like, for instance, the Monster series that I do, or the Village Corrupted series, like that stuff is like crystal clear in my head, why I'm doing what and why I'm putting things where I'm putting them. But with this one, it's just always a little bit weird. I'm kind of making one-off decisions. The things that are crystal clear in the process for the Ghostbusters, got rid of the ref, by the way, now, because we're far enough along, we don't need that anymore. The thing that's crystal clear is the pencil underdrawing, the ballpoint pen hard lines, the white paint pen used for the highlights and the outline around her, and then the fact that I'm going to use certain colors for shadows, and beyond that, I'm like, I don't actually have much of a game plan. We're going to figure this out as we go. So now you can see me just adding a couple little tweaks kind of as I'm going. I'm thinking to myself, well, how does that shadow work with that? And what do I want to do here? And let's get a rim light on this. So let's adjust this. And then over here, I'm going to dip back into Pete, grab what that highlight color was and start applying that highlight color. Now, when I go and do that, I'm not just grabbing the color. I'm also checking what was the opacity of that, what was the blend mode of that layer. After I check those parameters, I then flip it to normal, turn it to 100% opacity, sample the color, go back to the layer that I'm working with, set those parameters, and then just start going. That type of absolute consistency isn't always necessary when you're working on something like this, but I felt that it was, just to make sure that I was keeping these consistent. I did Egon, like I'm trying to remember exactly how this went down, but I did Egon a long time ago, and then I didn't do anyone for a while, and then I was like, maybe I should do the rest of the Ghostbusters. So I did, I think, Winston, and then Ray, and then Peter, pretty much like back to back, and then I took another long break before I did Janine again. So this is me like really trying to excavate my process. Here I'm going in and putting in this white paint pen, so when I do this on actual craft paper in meat space, it is much more chunky and physical. It doesn't have to be, you can lay it down really thin, but I think that some of the mess is what gives it its charm. So while I'm doing that here, I will also add a drop shadow to it to try and give it like a really subtle dimension. You might not see it when it's at a smaller resolution, but if you ever view it like at the iPad resolution, or if I'm going to later print this for some reason, you will see that, and it'll hopefully look really cool then. I also like using it for these highlights. It just kind of adds more to that handcrafted feel, that natural medium feel, as well as it keeps those values really punched up, which is just kind of nice. So we're coming into the end here. It's going to be on its final version of the image right now. There it is. Janine Melnitz, beloved by many, now added to the list of my Ghostbusters lineup. I hope you enjoyed watching this process. I know it's been a while. I'm trying to get back in the saddle, but thank you for watching. Expect more videos coming much more quickly. If you like this video, please consider hitting like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.